This is the 2024 Triumph Tiger 1200 Rally Explorer with a bunch of little tweaks for the new model year that I think Triumph will hope will iron out some niggles. But is it enough to keep it competitive in the large adventure bike market, or should you be looking to buy something else? Well, in this video we're going to take it out for a spin to go through all of the pros and cons to find out. But before we get on the road, I'd just like to say a huge thanks to REBELHORN for supporting the channel and sponsoring this video. REBELHORN, in my experience, make great looking gear with tons of features and protection, but all for what I think is a really decent price. Now in this video specifically, I'm wearing their Hiker 4 Adventure jacket, which has loads of vents and zips to keep you cool in summer, but then also a removable membrane for those wet and cold days. Now along with the Hiker, I'm also wearing their VANDAL jeans, which are super stretchy and comfortable, and their Range Adventure Touring gloves, which are some of my favourite gloves to wear now and are really very easy to get on and off with this big pull loop. So do check out the links down in the description below to find out more about their entire product lineup. And once again, a massive thanks to REBELHORN for their support. One of the things I really love about these bikes, as soon as I jump on them, is just how cocooned you feel in the cockpit. And a big part of that is the fact that this is the Explorer model. So both the GT Explorer, which is a little more road focused, and this more off-road biased Rally Explorer get a 30-litre fuel tank as opposed to the 20 on the other standard Tiger 1200s. So yeah, naturally, this one flares out quite a lot around the lower body and gives you a lot of wind protection. But I'd also say above that, with this windscreen, which is really quite good and easy to adjust with one hand, and the handguards, which come as standard fit, you know, the wind protection levels are great, and it's a nice, big, commanding bike that really does make you feel like king of the road. On top of that, for 2024, they've reshaped the seat. They've made it a little bit flatter, along with the low accessory seat as well. And the idea with that is that you can move around a bit more easily and find new positions, which can be really helpful if you are doing those very long stints in the saddle. So generally, all around, I'd say this is a very comfortable bike, and that's certainly one of the plus points for me. In fact, the only thing that would have really, I don't know, prevented me from recommending it as a great long distance tourer previously would have been the engine and the vibes. Now, I've been through this plenty of times on the channel, so this is a very short explanation. But effectively, the previous gen Tiger 1200 had a regular triple cylinder engine with regular intervals between the cylinders firing, and what that gave you is a very silky, smooth feeling, which was great when it came to doing those very steady stints on the motorway where the level of revs is barely changing. Thing is though, when they updated this bike in 2022, they gave it the same T-plane crank as the Tiger 900s, and the intention with that is to make it sound a bit more aggressive, but also give it a little more of a sensation of torque in the low revs, which should make it better for off-roading. Now, with everything in motorcycle design, there's always going to be a trade-off. And so while I will agree that it sounds great and it does have a bit more of that meatiness in the low revs, yeah, the sacrifice is when you're doing those steady stints on the motorway, where the vibes, certainly with the 2022 version, did start to creep in a bit. Now with this 2024 update though, they have made some changes to the engine internals to make it, they say, feel more refined and controlled in the low revs, but also it's got a new balancer strategy. I didn't really get any specifics beyond that from the press release, but the aim of it is to reduce the vibes through those key touch points, so the handlebars, the seat, and the foot pegs. Now for me, the Tiger 1200 never really quite felt so buzzy as the Tiger 900, and so it wasn't as problematic on this bike. But still, I will say, I do think this 2024 version is more pleasant to ride at speed, and I've done a few motorway runs on it, and at 60 it's really quite smooth. At 70 it's totally fine as well, and I think even at 70 and beyond it's easily acceptable and on a par with bikes from the competition like the 1300 GS or the Multistrada V4. There's only a tiny bit of a tingle through the foot pegs, but I think I could probably tolerate that. And really, the bars, the seat feel very smooth indeed, and so I'd say it's a real boost for this 2024 model. Don't get me wrong, if you rev this bike up into the upper half of the rev range, it's still gonna get those vibes going, and you'll feel it through the bars, certainly. But that's only usually quite a short duration. It's momentary that you'll be right up at the top of the revs, trying to make a quick acceleration for an overtake or that sort of thing. But where it really matters, in the mid to low revs, I think they've done a good job. So for me, that pretty much removes the only barrier to enjoying this engine that there was, because otherwise it's a lot of fun. You've got 150 horses on tap, so plenty of power despite it being a rather large bike. More soul to it, or excitement, than the Boxer Twin for me. And it's more fuel efficient by quite a stretch to the Multistrada V4. That bike, even in the rally model with 30 litres on board, is not as good as this bike in terms of range. And I'd say also this has got a nice balance between that 150 horsepower, but still plenty of mid-range and torque. It's a great all-rounder, I think. Really nice to use. A good quick shifter as well. Snicks through the gears nicely. And so again, this one is certainly going in the plus column for me. I think what also always surprises me, like I say, 261 kilograms curb this bike, is the way it handles and how engaging and fun it can be. I remember talking to one of the chassis specialists on the launch for this bike, and they talked about how they tried to minimize the difference between the GTs and the rally bikes. You see, the GTs, being more road focused, get cast wheels with a 19-inch front. This gets the 21-incher up front, which is of course better for rolling off road. But what he said they did was steepen the head angle on the frame for the rally models to try and counteract the negative effect on the handling of that larger front wheel. And I do remember switching between the two. I think it was the standard GT Pro and Rally Pro on the launch when we were doing the road ride, when we were going through all these beautiful, smooth, twisty roads in Portugal. And I really couldn't sense as much of a difference as if I was getting on like my Tiger 800, for example, which also has the 21-inch front, but feels a touch more sloppy. Then combine that with good suspension. It's the semi-active electronically adjustable Showa setup, excellent brakes, Brembo Stylemas, and I think just generally Triumph's handling know-how. And this really is a bike that can be as fun on the twisties as it can be comfortable on the motorway. You know, I think I'd say as well, they've done such a good job of trying to minimize that difference between the GT and the Rally, that I think the Rally would have to be the one I'd go for. Not only because the handling is reasonably comparable, but also this one for me just has the better looks. It looks more robust and adventure bikey. And then couple that with the fact that you do have that extra versatility, I suppose, of having the larger wheels, the taller stance, more suspension travel, and it really does feel like a proper go-anywhere tourer. The only compromise, I guess, with that versatile stance is, I think you might have guessed it, the seat height, which even in its low setting is 875 millimeters. And in its high setting, it's 895. And again, I'll reiterate that weight figure of 261 kilograms curb, which is only going to go up if you're carrying a passenger and or luggage. And so planting your feet might be desirable, but realistically only possible for the tallest riders. Now there is, like I say, in the accessories catalogue, a lower seat that takes 20 mil off the height. And again, being reshaped for this year, so should be as comfortable. The only downside is it's 255 quid, but that will bring the seat height down to 855 mil if you've got it in that low setting. So much more doable, I think, for a slightly wider range of riders. But perhaps Triumph acknowledge that it's still a tad on the lofty side. And so what you've got on this bike is the active preload reduction system. Now how this works is at lower speeds like this, say you come into a standstill or you're riding slow through town, you can hit the home button now, hold it for a second, and you'll see the shock pop up on the dash there, and that means that it's backed off the preload completely and tried to sit the rear end of the bike down a bit. And I think it can do up to 20 mil of reduction again, and so that could feasibly get this bike down to about 835, although they don't specifically give a figure, but the simple crude maths say it should be somewhere around that mark. And so again, that is just another feature, another option. If you like the idea of the long range tank, you like the looks of this bike, you like the off-roady versatility, but you also like touching the floor with your feet. Now look, that's definitely a feature that I'd rather have than not, absolutely. But what it does show, I think, a little bit is how Triumph have all of a sudden got a touch behind with this bike on the technology front. You see, earlier this year, I had plenty of time with the new BMW R1300 GS, and I have to say, comprehensively, their adaptive ride height system is far superior to this one. It does it automatically, so when you go below a certain speed, it'll drop the suspension. When you go back above a certain speed, it'll pop back up, and it happens so seamlessly that you barely notice it happening, and also it rarely seems to get in a fluster. And so for me, just not having to remember to hit this button is far preferable, and it just makes it feel like a more practical bike that's easier to use. And really, the seat height, you've got the benefits of both. It's commanded, it's tall, it's got good ground clearance, yet at a standstill it feels totally doable. Then you've got the fact that the telelever front end means that they've got a monoshock front and rear, and so it can back off the preload on both with that adaptive ride height system, and so that helps to preserve the handling and keep the bike level. Whereas this, of course, when you sit the back end down, it's not that pronounced, but naturally it's going to affect the geometry a little bit, and it's going to feel more sat down at the back like a bit of a speedboat. And so yeah, for me, of the two, there's no comparison. That is far more advanced. And I think the problem for this Tiger 1200 is that back in 2022, when it was first announced, this major update, it was going head to head with the R1250 GS, which was, let's face it, towards the end of its life cycle, and so it was starting to look a little bit dated in some areas. And the fact that this bike got that rear-facing radar, the blind spot warnings, a nice new dash, I really do like this big TFT, nice and clear to read, quite nicely designed as well. It looked good on the tech front compared to the GS, and I would have said, I think when I did a comparison video of this and the 1250 GS, I said that that was one of this bike's strengths. Fast forward to 2024 though, and yeah, the beginning of the year we first got the ability to review and buy as a customer the 1300 GS, and there's just no comparison. I mean, their semi-active electronic suspension can not only vary the damping but also the spring rates. It's got a broader range of adjustability, which means it should be able to find a better setting for the bike in different conditions at a wider range of loads. So whether you're riding solo or two up or with luggage or with both, their semi-active system should find a more optimal setting. And I've got to say, out of the two, the ride quality on the GS is just fantastic. You know, it's definitely a strength of the GS. It always has been, and it's got even better luggage. Even, you know, the luggage options for that bike now are centrally locking with the bike's keyless ignition. They've got internal lights because they're hooked up to the bike's electronics. They've got internal USB charging ports as well. And then you've got the radar front and rear. So front radar gives you active cruise control, which I think is a great tool for a big tourer like this. And then their rear radar gives you the same blind spot warnings as this bike, but also rear collision warnings. So it'll flash the rear indicators to warn traffic behind if it thinks that traffic is approaching too quickly and might run into you. And yeah, there's similar features as well on some of the other competition, like the KTM 1290 Super Adventure S has the front-facing radar. So does the Multistrada V4 that also has their easy lift system, which I think softens up the suspension when it's on the stand and you turn the ignition on, just to make it easier to get up off the stand. So there's lots of little techie ideas and innovations, and I do think it's fair to say now that even though this doesn't feel like a particularly archaic bike, it's certainly not at the cutting edge anymore, like it might have been more so anyway a couple of years back. Basically what I'm saying is, if you want to buy spaceship levels of adventure touring comfort and convenience, this probably isn't going to be, you know, your first choice anymore, but I don't think you should totally rule it out. I mean, certainly the 30-litre tank, if that's your main requirement, there are only 3 bikes on the market: this, the GS Adventure, and the Multistrada V4 Rally, and so you may as well go and demo all 3 of them because it's not that many bikes to get through. Where I think this one still comes up pretty strong is the excitement of riding it. I think it's more engaging and fun to ride than the GS. Because of the more traditional chassis, the telelever's comfortable, but it's maybe not providing the same level of feedback that you get on this bike. And also with the engine, like I say, I think this one to me just has that entertainment factor that's lacking a bit with the Boxer Twin. Also consider the price as well, which, you know, the GS has the lowest starting price, but this at 19.5, I think, for this Rally Explorer model, is just a touch more clear with the pricing, because basically you get all of the accessories thrown in, and there's really not much left, to be honest, in the accessories catalogue with these Explorer models. Take the GS, on the other hand, you know, that bike, as soon as you start to try and get it up to a comparable spec as this, I think it's starting to get more expensive. And I just like that about Triumph. Look, they're saying, here's everything on the bike. Sure, there are still some accessories like the low seat, which are more about, you know, customizing it to your particular ergonomic or use case, but largely fog lights, engine bars, heated grips, heated seats, connectivity, quick shifter, all those things that they think a lot of people are going to get use out of are there, and you kind of know where you stand with the price. So look, all in, who should think about buying this one? Well, I think, like I say, the fact they've managed to iron out those vibes a bit really make it easier to recommend as a good option. And I think also it's a fantastic looking bike, less so in this black, but more so in the matte khaki and the matte sandstorm, I think it's called, where it really does have that rugged, aggressive adventure vibe without being too blocky like the GS Adventure. Maybe it doesn't quite stand out in any one discipline. It's not as comfortable as the GS, it doesn't have the peak power of a Multistrada, but if you don't want to spend top dollar and you want a bike that can just perform kind of as an all-rounder, it's pretty good at most things, then yes, wholeheartedly can recommend at least taking this one for a spin.
As always though, I'd love to know what you think of it, so do let us know down in the comments below. And if you like the look of this bike but maybe want something a little smaller and more affordable, then I'll leave my review of the 2024 Tiger 900 on the screen now so you can give it a watch in case you haven't already. Do hit subscribe as well if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle reviews like this right here on MOTOBOB, and massive thanks for watching today, and we'll catch you in the next video.